In the House of Suddhoo by Rudyard Kipling. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Greg Marguerite. In the House of Suddhoo by Rudyard Kipling. A stone's throw out on either hand from that well-ordered road we tread, and all the world is wild and strange. Churl and ghoul and djinn and sprite shall bear us company tonight. For we have reached the oldest land, wherein the powers of darkness range. From the dusk to the dawn. The House of Suddhoo, near the Takasali Gate, is two-storied, with 4 carved windows of old brown wood and a flat roof. You may recognize it by 5 red hand-prints arranged like the 5 of diamonds on the whitewash between the upper windows. Bhagwan Dass, the bunnia, and a man who says he gets his living by seal-cutting live in the lower story, with a troop of wives, servants, friends, and retainers. The 2 upper rooms used to be occupied by Janoo and Azizun, and a little black and tan terrier that was stolen from an Englishman's house and given to Janoo by a soldier. Today only Janoo lives in the upper rooms. Suddhoo sleeps on the roof generally, except when he sleeps in the street. He used to go to Peshawar in the cold weather to visit his son, who sells curiosities near the Edwardes Gate, and then he slept under a real mud roof. Suddhoo is a great friend of mine because his cousin had a son who secured, thanks to my recommendation, the post of head messenger to a big firm in the station. Suddhoo says that God will make me a lieutenant governor one of these days. I dare say his prophecy will come true. He is very, very old, with white hair and no teeth worth showing, and he has outlived his wits, outlived nearly everything except his fondness for his son at Peshawar. Janoo and Azizun are Kashmiris, ladies of the city, and theirs was an ancient and more or less honorable profession. But Azizun has since married a medical student from the Northwest, and has settled down to a most respectable life somewhere near Bareilly. Bhagwan Dass is an extortionate and an adulterer. He is very rich. The man who is supposed to get his living by seal-cutting pretends to be very poor. This lets you know as much as is necessary of the 4 principal tenants in the House of Suddhoo. Then there's me, of course, but I am only the chorus that comes in at the end to explain things, so I do not count. Suddhoo was not clever. The man who pretends to cut seals was the cleverest of them all. Bhagwan Dass only knew how to lie, except Janoo. She was also beautiful, but that was her own affair. Suddhoo's son at Peshawar was attacked by pleurisy, and old Suddhoo was troubled. The seal-cutter man heard of Suddhoo's anxiety and made capital out of it. He was abreast of the times. He got a friend in Peshawar to telegraph daily accounts of the son's health, and here the story begins. Suddhoo's cousin's son told me one evening that Suddhoo wanted to see me, that he was too old and feeble to come personally, and that I should be conferring an everlasting honor on the House of Suddhoo if I went to him. I went, but I think, seeing how well off Suddhoo was then, that he might have sent something better than an ekka, which jolted fearfully to haul out a future lieutenant governor to the city on a muggy April evening. The ekka did not run quickly. It was full dark when we pulled up opposite the door of Runjit Singh's tomb, near the main gate of the fort. Here was Suddhoo, and he said that by reason of my condescension it was absolutely certain that I should become a lieutenant governor while my hair was yet black. Then we talked about the weather and the state of my health and the wheat crops for 15 minutes in the Huzuri Ba under the stars. Suddhoo came to the point at last. He said that Janoo had told him that there was an order of the Sirkar against magic, because it was feared that magic might one day kill the Empress of India. I didn't know anything about the state of the law, but I fancied that something interesting was going to happen. I said that so far from magic being discouraged by the government, it was highly commended. The greatest officials of the state practiced it themselves. If the financial statement isn't magic, I don't know what is." Then, to encourage him further, I said that if there was any jadoo afoot, I had not the least objection to giving it my countenance and sanction, and to seeing that it was clean jadoo, white magic, as distinguished from the unclean jadoo, which kills folk. It took a long time before Suddhoo admitted that this was just what he had asked me to come for. Then he told me in jerks and quavers that the man who said he cut seals was a sorcerer of the cleanest kind; that every day he gave Suddhoo news of his sick son in Peshawar more quickly than the lightning could fly, and that this news was always corroborated by the letters. Further, that he had told Suddhoo how a great danger was threatening his son which could be removed by clean jadoo, and, of course, heavy payment. I began to see exactly how the land lay, and told Suddhoo that I also understood a little jadoo in the western line, and would go to his house and see that everything was done decently and in order. We set off together, and on the way Suddhoo told me that he had paid the seal cutter between 100 and 200 rupees already, and the jadoo of that night would cost 200 more, which was cheap, he said, considering the greatness of his son's danger, but I do not think he meant it. The lights were all cloaked in the front of the house when we arrived. I could hear awful noises from behind the seal cutter's shop front, as if someone were groaning his soul out. Suddhoo shook all over, and while we groped our way upstairs told me that the jadoo had begun. Janoo and Azizun met us at the stairhead and told us that the jadoo work was coming off in their rooms, because there was more space there. Janoo is a lady of free-thinking turn of mind. She whispered that the jadoo was an invention to get money out of Suddhoo, and that the seal cutter would go to a hot place when he died. Suddhoo was nearly crying with fear and old age. He kept walking up and down the room in the half-light, repeating his son's name over and over again, and asking Azizun if the seal cutter ought not to make a reduction in the case of his own landlord. Janoo pulled me over to the shadow in the recess of the carved bow windows. The boards were up, and the rooms were only lit by one tiny oil lamp. There was no chance of my being seen if I stayed still. Presently the groans below ceased, and we heard steps on the staircase. That was the seal cutter. He stopped outside the door as the terrier barked and Azizun fumbled at the chain, and he told Suddhoo to blow out the lamp. This left the place in jet darkness, except for the red glow from the two huqas that belonged to Janoo and Azizun. The seal cutter came in, and I heard Suddhoo throw himself down on the floor and groan. Azizun caught her breath, and Janoo backed onto one of the beds with a shudder. There was a clink of something metallic, and then shot up a pale blue-green flame near the ground. The light was just enough to show Azizun pressed against one corner of the room with the terrier between her knees, Janoo with her hands clasped, leaning forward as she sat on the bed, Suddhoo face down, quivering, and the seal cutter. I hope I may never see another man like that seal cutter. He was stripped to the waist, with a wreath of white jasmine as thick as my wrist around his forehead, a salmon-colored loincloth round his middle, and a steel bangle on each ankle. This was not awe-inspiring. It was the face of the man that turned me cold. It was blue-gray in the first place. In the second, the eyes were rolled back till you could only see the whites of them, and in the third, the face was the face of a demon, a ghoul, anything you please except of the sleek, oily old ruffian who sat in the daytime over his turning lathe downstairs. He was lying on his stomach with his arms turned and crossed behind him, as if he had been thrown down, pinioned. His head and neck were the only parts of him off the floor. They were nearly at right angles to the body, like the head of a cobra at spring. It was ghastly. In the center of the room, on the bare earth floor, stood a big, deep brass basin, with a pale blue-green light floating in the center like a night light. Round that basin the man on the floor wriggled himself 3 times. How he did it I do not know. I could see the muscles ripple along his spine and fall smooth again, but I could not see any other motion. The head seemed the only thing alive about him, except that slow curl and uncurl of the laboring back muscles. Janoo from the bed was breathing 70 to the minute. Azizun held her hands before her eyes, and old Suddhoo, fingering at the dirt that had got into his white beard, was crying to himself.